Hello and welcome to another week of From Piccadilly to Wigan Pier. Now the penultimate source that we're looking at is Nigel Gray's The Worst of Times, which was a book that appeared in 1985. Now a bit of background, Nigel Gray is not a professional historian, he's a novelist who in 1974 sent out a series of adverts in newspapers and magazines asking to do some oral history interviews of people's memories of life during the 1930s. So the book eventually appears in 1985 and has a whole collection of interviews from people based on their experience of the Great Depression. So this is a story which very much focuses on the high unemployment and poverty of the time. And perhaps it can also be seen as a product of the time in which it was written. So the mid-1980s is a time of significant social division. This book appears in the same year as the miners' strike. And the high unemployment of the early 1980s was obviously still something that was clearly remembered. So unemployment, as we've already said before, had reached 3 million in 1981, the first time it had done that since the Great Depression. So as we've already seen in this course, the 1930s was a period in which social investigation thrived. We've looked at the Orwell book A Road to Wigan Pier, and there were also a number of social investigations in the further reading that you might have had a chance to look at, such as Beals and Lambert's The Memoirs of the Unemployed. And another source which we haven't had a chance to really look at so far, but which is also very significant in terms of thinking about social investigation, is the Mass Observation Project of the late 1930s. And to get an introduction to this, I'd recommend the Worktown website, which I've mentioned in the bibliography. So if you're interested in producing an essay on this source, I think it's worth thinking about how Gray's account of the Great Depression compares with some of the contemporary social investigation that was produced during the 1930s. In particular, think about what type of people are being interviewed by Gray. Is this a self-selecting group, and how does this affect the representativeness of this source? And also it's worth thinking about how does this source compare with modern professional forms of oral history writing. And I've produced a series of books there in the bibliography that are worthwhile thinking about if you're interested in looking at this subject. Hello and welcome to another week of From Piccadilly to Wigan Pier. Now our penultimate source that we're looking at is Nigel Gray's The Worst of Times, a book which appeared in 1985 and is perhaps the only source that we look at which has become more difficult to do a Google search on in the last 4 years.